On live television, United States General Michael Langley, commander of AFRICOM, lowered his voice and bowed his head as he formally apologized to a young leader from the African continent, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, interim president of Burkina Faso. This was not just a diplomatic gesture. It was a historical moment unlike any before it, a senior American military officer backing down before the rising will of Africa. This apology was not a mere formality. It was a slap in the face of those who still believe Africa can be manipulated without consequence. It all began when General Langley, speaking before the U.S. Senate, accused Captain Ibrahim of using the country's gold reserves to entrench his power. But that statement sparked outrage, a wildfire of anger and unity across the African continent and its diaspora. And now, under pressure and scrutiny, Langley was forced to retract and apologize. A rare move for a U.S. general, but a powerful victory for African sovereignty, Pan-African pride, and the dream of a continent finally standing on its own feet. But why did Langley truly back down? Was it just political damage control, or are we witnessing a deeper global shift in power and influence? As African youth rise, demanding dignity, justice, and control over their natural wealth, Captain Ibrahim has become more than a leader. He is a symbol. Join me as we uncover the truth behind this unprecedented apology, expose the real motives behind the accusations, and reveal why Ibrahim Traoré is now the face of Africa's awakening, a name echoing from the streets of Ouagadougou to the halls of global power. At a U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, hearing General Michael Langley, head of the United States Africa Command AFRICOM, delivered a statement that would ignite a firestorm across the African continent. Speaking with authority, Langley accused Captain Ibrahim Traoré's administration of using over $4 billion in national gold reserves to fund the military and consolidate power instead of using the wealth for public welfare. These remarks, broadcast live from one of the most powerful institutions in the world, the U.S. Senate, were nothing short of incendiary. Langley went further, suggesting that Burkina Faso had become a hotbed for terrorism, with extremist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda gaining strength since Traoré came to power. He implied that the captain's nationalization of gold resources was contributing to this instability. The backlash was immediate and explosive. From Ouagadougou to Johannesburg, from Accra to Dakar, millions of Africans felt insulted and outraged. How could a U.S. general, someone far removed from African realities, have the audacity to publicly criticize a young African leader striving to reclaim national sovereignty? Activists, commentators, and everyday citizens flooded social media and news outlets, accusing Langley of neo-colonial arrogance and thinly veiled interference. One resounding message emerged across the continent: the gold is ours. The decisions are ours. The future is ours. What had started as a military remark quickly escalated into a political and symbolic confrontation between two worlds, one rising with the fire of independence and dignity, and the other clinging to old patterns of control through criticism and diplomatic pressure. The public outcry forced AFRICOM and Langley into damage control mode, and soon the world would witness the unthinkable: a U.S. general forced to apologize, not just to a man, but to a movement. While General Langley painted a picture of misuse and militarization, reality on the ground tells a very different story, one that millions of Africans are witnessing with their own eyes. Since assuming leadership, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has been redirecting the country's gold reserves, not toward luxury or dictatorship, but toward the people. Under his watch, Burkina Faso has launched agricultural revival programs, industrialization initiatives, and job creation schemes aimed at empowering young Africans. These are not empty political slogans. There is video evidence, eyewitness accounts, and tangible results. Just days before Langley's infamous statement, Captain Ibrahim was seen handing over agricultural equipment to rural communities, kickstarting efforts to make Burkina Faso food secure. Another report showed him laying the foundation stone for industrial plants, the first steps in ending decades of dependency on imported goods. He's also investing in local infrastructure, giving young people tools and training to rebuild their own roads, their own economy, their own future. So the question arises, if gold is being used to feed the nation, create jobs, and build industries, how can that be a threat? Many African voices argue that it's not the use of gold that's the problem. It's who is losing access to it. For decades, foreign powers benefited enormously from Africa's untapped mineral wealth. Now, with leaders like Ibrahim taking control, those benefits are being redirected inward. In this context, Langley's statement appears not as a concern for African welfare, but as a reaction to lost influence. Ibrahim Traoré represents a new generation of African leaders, bold, unapologetic, and committed to the continent's self-determination. His actions have inspired hope, not fear, among millions. This is why the accusations from Washington felt like an attack not just on one man, but on a whole movement. And this is why the apology that followed wasn't just necessary, it was inevitable. While American General Michael Langley pointed fingers accusing Captain Ibrahim Traoré of diverting billions in gold to strengthen his grip on power, the reality unfolding in Burkina Faso tells a radically different story, one of hope, dignity, and a people reclaiming what is rightfully theirs, rebuilding from the ground up. Since taking power in 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has launched a campaign not of tyranny, but of transformation. He has redirected Burkina Faso's gold reserves toward massive development projects aimed at restoring food security, revitalizing industry, and most importantly, giving the people ownership of their future. One of his earliest moves was to equip rural farmers with agricultural machinery. Entire convoys of tractors, irrigation systems, and seed distributors were handed over directly to communities that had been forgotten for decades. In a country where hunger has often walked hand in hand with foreign dependency, this act was more than economic, it was revolutionary. But Ibrahim didn't stop there. His administration began investing in industrial development, breaking ground on factories and processing plants, projects designed not only to reduce imports, but to retain wealth within Burkina Faso. Roads, bridges, and local infrastructure once left in ruins are now being built by Burkinabe hands, using Burkinabe resources with Burkinabe pride. Empowering youth, not armies. Contrary to Langley's claims that the gold was being used solely to fund the military, Captain Ibrahim's focus has been on the youth, the largest and most restless demographic in the country. With over 70% of the population under the age of 30, Ibrahim understands one thing clearly: joblessness is a bigger threat than any extremist group. He has initiated training programs in construction, agriculture, mining, and technology aimed at building a self-reliant generation capable of defending not only their land, but their economy. His message is simple yet powerful. We don't need handouts. We need our resources and the freedom to build. The real reason behind the attacks. It is not lost on anyone that terrorist attacks began spiking precisely after foreign troops were expelled. Captain Ibrahim made the bold move to remove French forces from Burkina Faso, a decision celebrated by many citizens, but one that also shook the geopolitical status quo. By nationalizing gold and pushing out foreign influence, Ibrahim disrupted a decades-old system of quiet exploitation. For years, gold from Burkina Faso has been funneled out through multinationals and foreign intermediaries. Now, for the first time, the government is not just mining gold, it is refining and minting it locally into bars and storing it within national borders. This gold, Ibrahim insists, is the fuel for a self-sufficient economy, not for personal gain. And to millions across Africa, that logic resonates deeply. A pan-African symbol emerges. Captain Ibrahim is no longer just a leader of Burkina Faso. He has become a symbol of the Pan-African revival. Across the continent, from South Africa to Ghana, Kenya to Nigeria, youth movements, activists, and even scholars are pointing to him as a modern-day Sankara. Just as Thomas Sankara once did in the 1980s, Ibrahim is preaching self-reliance, dignity, and anti-imperialism. The only difference, he's putting it into practice at scale. During Africa Day commemorations, massive rallies erupted in support of Ibrahim. Protesters in Ghana waved Burkinabe flags. Young Africans in Europe posted videos declaring solidarity. "This is not just about Burkina Faso, it's about all of us," one protester in Accra shouted. Countering the Western narrative, General Langley's statement was not received as an objective military analysis. To many Africans, it was seen as a carefully crafted message of doubt, intended to delegitimize a movement that threatens Western access to African minerals. Langley claimed concern for Burkina Faso's stability, but conveniently ignored the destabilizing effects of foreign meddling. He spoke of extremism growing under Ibrahim's rule, but said nothing about how terrorists often thrive in power vacuums left by foreign exits and failed policies. The African response was swift and clear: "Don't lecture us on sovereignty while undermining it." Numerous African commentators likened Langley's tone to that of colonial administrators. The narrative is all too familiar. A resource-rich African country dares to chart its own path, and suddenly the Western press is flooded with warnings of instability, corruption, and terror. But the people aren't buying it this time. A battle between two futures. What is happening in Burkina Faso is not just a local political shift. It is part of a broader continental awakening, a growing realization that Africa's greatest wealth is being used against it, and that liberation will not come from aid or foreign troops, but from taking control of the land and what lies beneath it. Captain Ibrahim's critics call him dangerous. His supporters call him a visionary. Either way, his message is being heard far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, and that is why Langley's apology, whether sincere or strategic, was inevitable. Because this isn't just about gold. This is about Africa redefining power, rewriting its role in the world, and standing up to those who have long profited from its silence. And in that story, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has become a chapter that no one can ignore. General Michael Langley, in his controversial statement, claimed that terrorism has increased significantly in Burkina Faso since Captain Ibrahim Traoré assumed power. He pointed to the resurgence of groups like ISIS in the Sahel, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and JNIM, using these facts to cast doubt on the leadership of a young African president. But what General Langley failed to mention deliberately or ignorantly is that the rise in violence is not a symptom of failed leadership, but rather a calculated response to reclaimed sovereignty. Throughout modern African history, there is a disturbing pattern. Whenever a nation asserts full control over its natural resources, external and internal destabilization follows. It happened in Libya with Muammar Gaddafi. It happened in the Congo with Patrice Lumumba. It happened in Burkina Faso itself with Thomas Sankara. And now it is happening again with Ibrahim Traoré. The common thread: leaders who try to break the economic chains of foreign dependency become targets politically, militarily, and sometimes physically. These men are not overthrown because they failed their people. They are overthrown because they dared to succeed without Western permission. Captain Ibrahim's decision to nationalize Burkina Faso's gold industry, expel foreign troops, and reject international financial strings was a direct threat to a decades-old system of exploitation. For foreign interests, this was not just economic loss, it was geopolitical rebellion. And in that context, terrorism becomes more than a local security threat. It becomes a strategic tool. Let's be clear, terrorism in the Sahel is real, deadly, and deeply tragic. But its growth in Burkina Faso cannot be viewed in isolation. Extremist groups thrive in regions where borders are weak, governance is undermined, and foreign agendas are at play. Burkina Faso, positioned at the heart of West Africa and recently disconnected from traditional Western control, has become the perfect target. Reports from local intelligence suggest that many of these militants are crossing into Burkina Faso from neighboring countries, some of which maintain close economic and military ties with France. These are not random fighters, They are well-armed, well-funded, and increasingly sophisticated. Their goal to destabilize a rising African government that has chosen the path of self-reliance. Suspiciously, the timing of intensified attacks aligns with Traoré's boldest reforms, including the expulsion of French troops and the launch of a local gold refinery initiative. To many observers, the message is chillingly clear. If you take control of your wealth, we will bring you war. What is most telling is the international reaction or lack thereof. When terrorists kill innocent civilians in Burkina Faso, there is no global outcry, no mass condemnations, no UN emergency sessions. But the moment a young African leader takes back control of national resources, the international media lights up with headlines about authoritarianism and instability. This selective outrage exposes a grim reality. The global system does not mind African suffering, it fears African sovereignty. General Langley's narrative that gold is being misused and terrorism is the result fits perfectly into the long-standing Western strategy of discrediting African independence under the guise of concern. His remarks were less about counterterrorism and more about countering a political movement that dares to ask, what if Africa kept its own gold? Ironically, the presence of foreign troops, especially French forces, did little to curb terrorism in the past. In fact, from 2015 to 2021, while France maintained a strong military presence in Burkina Faso and Mali, terrorist incidents steadily increased. Their withdrawal has not caused the problem, it merely exposed how ineffective their presence truly was. Moreover, there are credible reports that certain foreign intelligence operations turned a blind eye, or worse, to the movement of armed groups, so long as their activity served a broader destabilizing purpose. This kind of shadow warfare is not new. It's been used in the Middle East, in Latin America, and now increasingly in Africa. Despite the threats, despite the bombs, despite the assassinations, a growing number of African nations and African people are standing firm. They see what's happening in Burkina Faso not as a failure, but as a blueprint. Captain Ibrahim is showing what's possible when a country decides to serve its own people first and refuses to be ruled from foreign capitals. The response from the African public has been overwhelming. Youth groups across the continent have declared solidarity. Pan-African forums have shared strategies. Civil society leaders are openly stating what was once whispered. Terrorism is being weaponized against us, not by accident, but by design. And Captain Ibrahim, despite multiple assassination attempts, continues to press forward. Make no mistake, the war in Burkina Faso is not simply between government forces and Islamic militants. It is a war for the soul of Africa's future. It is a confrontation between two irreconcilable visions. One where Africa remains a resource pit for the global north, unstable, dependent, and divided. The other where Africa owns its land, mines its gold, trains its youth, and stands united. General Langley and others like him may speak of terrorism, but what they truly fear is independence. The rise of self-determined leaders like Ibrahim threatens an entire structure built on African silence and submission. And that is why the violence grows, because so does the resistance. Something extraordinary is happening across the African continent. From Accra to Nairobi, from Lagos to Cape Town, a rising tide of unity is sweeping through the youth of Africa, and at the center of this movement stands a name few in the West expected to become iconic: Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He is not a president by traditional standards. He is not a career politician. He does not come with the Western-educated Polish that global institutions usually celebrate. But for millions of young Africans, he represents something far more powerful: authenticity, courage, and the unapologetic defense of African sovereignty. Pan-Africanism, once a dream, championed by the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and Thomas Sankara, is being revived not through conferences or treaties, but through action. And Captain Ibrahim, by nationalizing Burkina Faso's gold, expelling foreign military powers, and investing in local development has become the poster child for the 21st century African revolution. In his speeches, he doesn't just speak of independence. He speaks of economic liberation, youth empowerment, and continental unity. He denounces the exploitation of African resources by foreign powers and urges Africans to stop looking outside for validation. These words are no longer radical, they are resonating. In Ghana, youth marched through the streets on Africa Day, holding signs reading, "We are all Ibrahim." In South Africa, students painted murals of the Burkina Faso leader beside icons like Mandela and Sankara. Across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, clips of Ibrahim's speeches are going viral, often subtitled in French, English, Swahili, Arabic, and Portuguese. The message is clear: this is our moment. What sets this movement apart is that it is organic. It wasn't orchestrated by political parties or funded by NGOs. It erupted from the ground up, from frustration, from awareness, and from a deep hunger for dignity. Young Africans are tired of being seen as beggars on a rich continent. They are tired of foreign leaders lecturing them about democracy while looting their future. And when one of their own, a young captain who looks like them, talks like them, and dares to stand tall, takes action, they respond not with applause but with commitment. One of the most powerful aspects of this movement is how Captain Ibrahim has given voice to the voiceless. In rural areas where development has long been promised but never delivered, his government has started building real infrastructure. In urban slums where unemployment breeds despair, he speaks of creating African industries built by Africans for Africans. This is why the accusations from General Langley that the gold reserves are being misused fell so flat. They were not just seen as misguided. They were seen as an insult to the intelligence and aspirations of an entire generation. Young Africans do not want charity. They want ownership. They want a system that rewards their labor and respects their identity. And for the first time in a long time, someone in power is saying the same thing out loud and acting on it. This is not merely emotional support, it is increasingly strategic. Pan-African networks of young professionals, entrepreneurs, artists, and activists are connecting across borders, sharing ideas, raising awareness, and even organizing economic boycotts against companies perceived as exploiting African nations. In Nairobi, tech developers are building platforms to track resource movements and promote transparency. In Dakar, musicians are releasing songs that remix Captain Ibrahim's speeches into anthems. In Abuja, activists are hosting forums to teach high school students about Pan-African economics and how to demand accountability from their governments. This isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. This is about a continental consciousness awakening, one that sees Ibrahim's struggle as symbolic of their own. Resistance from the old guard. Of course, not everyone is pleased. Some African elites, many of whom have long relied on foreign partnerships for power and profit, are uneasy. They fear this youth-led resurgence will upset the carefully constructed balance of power that allows them to rule without real reform. But their warnings about instability or immaturity are increasingly falling on deaf ears. The youth are asking one simple question: if you've had decades to lead and we're still in poverty, what do we have to lose by trying something new? Captain Ibrahim represents that new. And even though he is only one man, he stands on the shoulders of a movement that is much bigger than himself, planting seeds for the future. The long-term impact of this Pan-African wave may take years to fully measure, but the seeds are already planted. In schools, young students are talking about sovereignty and resource control. In universities, new political discourse is being shaped not by Western textbooks, but by African realities. Captain Ibrahim's story is being studied, debated, and most importantly, emulated. Other young leaders across the continent are taking notes. They see that it is possible to speak truth, face backlash, and still command the respect of your people. And should one of them rise tomorrow with the same boldness, they will not rise alone. More than a man. A movement Captain Ibrahim Traoré may not have asked to become the face of a continent's frustration and hope, but the role has chosen him. In a world of carefully scripted politicians, he is raw, direct, and deeply human. In a global system obsessed with power, he speaks of justice. And most importantly, in a time when youth everywhere are told to wait their turn, he reminds them that their time is now. This is not just a fan base. It's not just politics. It is Pan-Africanism reborn, through action, through unity, and through the unwavering belief that Africa's future belongs to Africans. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's journey is far from over. What began as a quiet military transition in Burkina Faso has now exploded into a continent-wide conversation about dignity, sovereignty, and the future of African leadership. And the moment a U.S. general, one of the most powerful military figures on earth, was forced to address, acknowledge, and possibly apologize to a young African leader. That wasn't just news. That was history. This is not just about Captain Ibrahim. It's not even just about Burkina Faso. It's about every African nation fighting to break free from the shadows of colonialism, corruption, and global manipulation. It's about young people who are no longer waiting for change, they are becoming the change. The apology, if it comes fully, won't erase the decades of exploitation. But it will mark a turning point, a symbolic recognition that Africa is no longer silent, divided, or powerless. It is rising, it is organizing, and it is beginning to speak with one voice. If you believe in an Africa that owns its wealth, controls its destiny, and protects its brave leaders, share this message. Let the world know that a new generation is awake. Let the world know that Pan-Africanism is not a dream, it is happening. Comment below with your thoughts. Subscribe to stay updated on this movement. Share this video with every African who needs hope and every outsider who needs a reminder. Because what Captain Ibrahim is doing today will echo tomorrow in Ghana, in Congo, in Senegal, in South Africa, and beyond. This is not just a moment, it's a movement. And the future of Africa is being written not by generals in Washington, but by bold leaders and fearless youth on African soil. The public apology delivered by General Michael Langley to Captain Ibrahim Traoré was far more than a diplomatic concession, it was a symbolic watershed. For decades, Africa has been portrayed as a passive actor on the world stage, often subject to external lectures and imposed models of governance. This moment reversed that dynamic. A senior U.S. military commander bowing before a young African leader sent a message that echoed across the continent. Africa is no longer willing to be spoken for. The apology signaled a recognition, voluntary or forced, that a new chapter is unfolding, authored by Africans themselves. One of the most striking lessons from this confrontation is that narratives matter as much as policies. General Langley's accusations, broadcast live from the U.S. Senate, were not just statements of concern. They were designed to shape global perceptions, framing Traoré's gold reforms as authoritarian and dangerous. Yet the response revealed something more powerful. The African public has grown increasingly sophisticated in deconstructing foreign narratives. Instead of accepting Langley's framing, African citizens and intellectuals turned the spotlight back on the United States and its legacy of interference. They questioned the timing, motives, and accuracy of the accusations, reframing them as neo-colonial provocations rather than objective observations. This shift in narrative ownership is crucial. For too long, African leaders who resisted Western influence were painted as threats to stability. From Lumumba to Sankara, the pattern has been tragically consistent. Bold, sovereign-minded figures were either overthrown, assassinated, or permanently discredited. The story of Captain Traoré appears to follow a similar script, at least initially. But this time, the outcome is different. Instead of silencing the movement, Langley's attack catalyzed it. What was intended to undermine Traoré's legitimacy only amplified his message and validated his approach. In that reversal lies a profound lesson about the limits of external propaganda in the digital age. Equally important is the public's reaction, not just in Burkina Faso, but across the continent and diaspora. The swift and widespread outrage demonstrated a pan-African consciousness that transcends borders. From social media campaigns in Ghana to rallies in South Africa and solidarity videos from the diaspora, the people made it clear attacking Traoré was seen as attacking an entire generation's aspiration for autonomy. This unifying effect illustrates the power of symbolic leadership. Traoré is not admired because he is flawless. He is admired because he embodies a resistance long overdue. In him, many see a reflection of their own frustrations with corruption dependency and generational stagnation. Moreover, the story highlights a recurring contradiction in global politics. When African countries remain quiet, passive or externally dependent, their governments are often described as stable and cooperative. But when a leader like Traoré begins nationalizing resources, investing in local infrastructure, and reducing reliance on foreign aid, the labels suddenly shift to autocratic, controversial, or threatening. This contradiction reveals that what is often framed as concern for African welfare may in fact be concern for lost access to African wealth. Understanding this tension is essential for interpreting the motives behind international criticism and for developing a more accurate sense of agency in African politics. The controversy also underlines the importance of tangible results. Traoré's strength does not lie in rhetoric alone. It lies in visible progress tractors handed to farmers' factories under construction and jobs being created for youth. These are not abstract promises, but lived experiences. They provide a counterweight to foreign accusations, offering citizens proof that sovereignty is not just symbolic, it delivers results. This is a lesson in governance. Legitimacy today is grounded not just in elections or alliances, but in visible, accountable development. A further lesson lies in the response to terrorism. Langley's attempt to link Traoré's policies to increased extremism ignored a deeper, more uncomfortable truth: violence often follows sovereignty. Whenever African nations attempt to control their own resources, internal and external destabilization ensues. This was seen in Libya, Congo, and now in Burkina Faso. The implication is clear: sovereignty is not merely an ideal, it is a threat to established systems of exploitation, and those systems will use every tool available: media, military pressure, and even insurgency to maintain their foothold. Recognizing this pattern is essential if Africans are to build real security that does not depend on foreign boots on the ground. Another important takeaway is the need for unity among African nations. Traoré's movement gained momentum not only because of his personal bravery, but also because it tapped into broader Pan-African ideals. The revival of Pan-Africanism is no longer theoretical, it is becoming operational. From cultural solidarity to strategic policy alignment, young Africans are beginning to connect their struggles, their economies, and their futures. This convergence points to a lesson in scale. Individual resistance can be powerful, but collective action is transformative. Traoré's story becomes not just an inspiration, but a blueprint for regional coordination against external manipulation. The story also exposes the cracks within Africa's own leadership structures. While the youth and civil society rise in support of sovereignty, some members of the old guard remain entangled in foreign dependencies. Their discomfort with the new wave of leaders is not only ideological, it is existential. They fear losing power, influence, and international validation. This intergenerational divide teaches us that true change in Africa will require both bottom-up movements and a deliberate reshaping of elite incentives. Otherwise, internal sabotage may prove just as dangerous as external interference. From an educational standpoint, this narrative is reshaping how history and politics are discussed across African schools and universities. Traoré is no longer just a news item, he is becoming a case study. Students are analyzing his speeches, evaluating his policies, and comparing them to past leaders like Sankara. This intellectual engagement signals a critical shift. African youth are no longer just consuming information, they are curating it, contextualizing it, and mobilizing it. This lesson in civic engagement is perhaps the most hopeful of all, because it suggests that future leadership will emerge not from foreign approval, but from local knowledge and moral clarity. Finally, the apology itself, whether sincere or not, marked a precedent. For the first time in living memory, a U.S. general had to publicly retreat from a position of criticism directed at an African leader. While the apology will not undo decades of exploitation, it serves as a symbolic admission the tide is turning. Africa is no longer a passive object in geopolitical equations. It is becoming a subject thinking, speaking, and acting for itself. In sum, the events surrounding General Langley and Captain Traoré offer more than political drama. They offer a lesson in dignity, in strategic communication, in leadership under pressure, and in the enduring power of people when they rally around justice. This is not just a victory for one man, it is a collective affirmation of Africa's right to define its own future. And that lesson, above all, must not be forgotten.